Sometimes the most meaningful gifts or decorations aren't just regular old family pictures. I'm talking about your treasured high school football jersey, a ticket from your first concert, or a flyer for a loved one's art show. These are your most sentimental possessions, and they can be protected and immortalized by the perfect frame. You know, I just got an old passport of my dad's framed. He died a couple years ago, and I don't know why. This really spoke to me. Luckily, FrameBridge makes it easy and affordable to custom frame just about anything. Just pick the perfect frame for your piece from their curated selection of styles, and their design experts will do the rest. And they'll ship it right to your doorstep for free on orders over $100. Best of all is FrameBridge's happiness guarantee. If you're not 100% happy with your piece for any reason, they'll make it right. Visit framebridge.com or one of 8 local FrameBridge stores at 14th Street, Union Market, Georgetown, Bethesda, Old Town, Clarendon, McLean, or the Mosaic District, and start framing. Today on CityCast DC, so what on earth is going on at the Washington Post? Our city's venerable daily is hemorrhaging employees and going through a wild change in its identity. And it's weird because the last thing a lot of folks might remember about the Post is that the news organization seemed to be swimming in Jeff Bezos' money. Paul Farhi spent years writing about the industry for the Post, and more recently he's turned his eye on his former employer. He's here to talk about how things got to this point. Today is Monday, July 28th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Paul.
Hello, Michael.
So you were a longtime Washington Post reporter. Just for folks who don't obsessively follow your byline like I do, what did you do at the Post? How long were you there?
I'm almost ashamed to admit it because it makes me sound very old, which maybe I am, but I was there since 1988 till the end of 2023, so 35 years. And during the time I was there, I did a little bit of everything. And for the last dozen years I was there, I was the media reporter. I wrote about the media industry and the news industry, and I think that was my favorite period of all the many years I spent there, and took the buyout at the end of 2023. And now I'm kind of, I don't know what you'd call it, semi-retired freelance writer. I just finished a piece that's going to come up in The Atlantic, but I've written for a bunch of different publications in the last year and a half and really enjoy it because I can't get it out of my system.
So if you were the media reporter, maybe you can help me put into words this feeling. I have a hard time explaining sometimes to people who are newer to Washington how absolutely important and dominant the Post was, not as just the big national paper that broke Watergate stories, but as the hometown paper. It could make or break mayoral candidates. It set the agenda. And these were the days when it was owned by the Washington Post company, now Graham Holdings, which owns CityCast. It saw itself first and foremost as a hometown paper. Is that the right way to understand it?
That's absolutely the right way to understand it. Don Graham, your CEO, would have said it, and probably did say it several times, that the primary mission of the Post was to cover official Washington, but also Metro Washington. And we did have foreign bureaus. The Post still does have those. But primarily, the business model and the whole notion of the paper was to be the paper for Washington, D.C. and its environment. And in fact, in the pre-internet days, it was maybe the most dominant newspaper in its home market of any in the country. The penetration, that is to say, the number of people who took it divided by the number of households, was something like 70+%. In other words, on Sundays, 70+% of households in the Washington metropolitan region got the newspaper. And on a daily basis, it was also 50+%. It was enormous. And that was the business model, the source of its profitability, and the source of my job, frankly.
And that the ownership really understood that the key to the business was like the school librarian in Rockville or whatever, who was a subscriber to the paper and was a target audience for whoever advertised in it. That obviously is a very different understanding from Jeff Bezos, who purchased it and was able to put a lot of money in. But his business inclination is to think about the whole world.
Yes, that's a great question, because the world of Don Graham and the Washington Post company's ownership of the paper and the transition to Jeff Bezos occurs obviously in the internet era in 2013. And the internet era changes really the whole business thrust of the Washington Post. It's not that it doesn't want to be the newspaper for Washington, but being the newspaper for Washington is less of a business proposition, a profitable one on the internet, than being a newspaper or news organization that reaches the English-speaking world, which is what Jeff Bezos has pointed the Washington Post to in the 12 years he's owned the paper. And it all makes strategic business sense to be a newspaper that appeals not just to the school librarian in Rockville, but the engineer in Seattle or the financier in London. And that's now the market for the Washington Post, because print is not really a viable delivery system or technology anymore. It's outmoded. It will soon disappear. The internet is the way to go, and the audience is on the internet. One of the problems that newspapers have is that they are effectively too local. A newspaper in Tennessee or Wyoming or Nebraska only has a market in those places because that's really all it covers. They're not going to get readers in New York City or London or Paris. The Washington Post is among the few newspapers, the news organizations in the world that actually could appeal to a market outside its presumed home market. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, maybe USA Today, the Washington Post, they're the only ones that really have a chance to expand beyond their home markets because their home markets are worldwide.
So in the Bezos era, a lot about the Post was given a whole lot of new resources and new lease on life. For the one thing that didn't particularly grow was Metro. And just even beyond that, just the sort of Washington area coverage in general. And people would complain about this. And I thought, given how he understands the market of the whole English-speaking world, it was a kind of a public service to even maintain it at the level it was maintained at.
Absolutely true. It's a legacy of all the years that the Washington Post was the hometown newspaper. But in an internet world, unfortunately, it doesn't make a lot of sense to pour your resources into local coverage because that market is so limited to just the local market, people who live there. Why would you want to maintain this great infrastructure of a Metro staff when it's going to reach, at best, 10% of your digital audience, which is exactly what it does, about 10% of your audience, when you could expand your subscriber base, your readership generally, by being a more generic, a more worldwide, a more outward-looking publication. And that's what Bezos has, I think, correctly oriented the Washington Post to become. And that is at the sacrifice of coverage of Montgomery County or the DC Council or what's going on in Reston these days. The Post cares much less about those things. It still cares somewhat. It still covers those things somewhat, but that's not the thrust of the news organization. It's what's happening in official Washington and what's happening around the world.
Remember that amazing little cafe you discovered last summer? With the perfect latte and the crazy view? Or that sweet hiking spot your friend told you about, but you can't quite remember the name? With Overlook Maps, special places never get lost again. Create personal lists of places that you've been and want to go. Build your must-visit list for your next vacation, your foodie favorites for date night, or your weekend getaways for when you just need to escape. Planning a trip with friends? Create a shared list where everyone can add their ideas. Visiting a new city? Check out lists from locals who know the real gems, not just the tourist traps. And here's the best part. No ads cluttering your lists. No one selling your data to advertisers. Just your personal collection of amazing places organized exactly how you want them. Overlook Maps. Collect, organize, and share the places that matter to you. Download free at overlookmaps.com. And check out overlookmaps.com/DC to see some of our lists and great spots on a map and in your pocket. Your places, your way.
I was deep in it, gaming on Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. Unfolding the screen made it twice as big and so immersive, I kinda lost myself. Might have trolled a little too close to the sun. Someone in the chat told me to touch grass, so I took my Z Fold 7 outside and kept playing. Still won, got a tan, and a nice little reset. Powerful processor, realistic graphics, you stay locked in, streak stays alive. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
So earlier this summer, they announced that they were going to end having a standalone Metro section in print. There was all of the usual caveats about this doesn't mean there's any fewer stories. It's just this expensive print thing. But can you put that in the context of where their Metro coverage was and where it is now?
Well, let's just talk a few numbers for the purposes of this discussion. The Post reaches on a daily basis maybe 2 million people. Over the course of a month, it's probably 50 million unique visitors. 50 million is a lot. In print, every single day, they have less now, I think, than 100,000 subscribers. So you're looking at appealing to 100,000 print subscribers or 50 million unique worldwide visitors around the world. Which are you going to choose? Print at this point is an afterthought. Print at this point is just the tail on the dog. The dog is what's going on online digitally. And again, Jeff Bezos saw that, knew that, and rightly, I guess, from a business perspective, pursued that over the print. He is content, I believe, to let print slowly die. Whether he's content with that or not, it's going to happen. And it's happening as we speak. When I joined the paper way back in the Jurassic era, the Post circulation on Sunday, at least, was over 1 million. It's on Sunday, I would guess it's probably about 250,000. Daily, it's under 100,000. So it's a declining business. And as I say, someday it's going to disappear altogether. If you have any future at all, you're pursuing that future online.
So you had I'm sure, one of the most dramatic bylines in Post history. It was your byline atop the story about the sale to Jeff Bezos. Can you just take us back? Like, what was capture the mood in the wake of that? And the Post had been struggling for so long, and then what happened?
I love this story because I've told it a million times, but also it was really fun in the moments it happened. 2013, my wife and I took a trip to the Dominican Republic, went to a resort, and get a phone call there out of the blue, and it's Marty Barron, the editor of the Post. Why is Marty Barron calling me while I'm on vacation? And he says to me, where are you going to be on Sunday? I said, well, we'll be back then. He says, well, okay, I need you back on Sunday. I said, why? And he says, there's a story that's going to break and I need you to write it. I said, okay, Marty, tell me what the story is. He says, I can't tell you. Just be at the phone Sunday at 9:30 in the morning and I'll call you. I hang up. My wife and I can't figure out what the heck this is about. And we debated what it could be. And my wife said to me casually, maybe the Washington Post is going to be sold. And I said, no, Don Graham and Catherine Weymouth, the publisher, the family would never sell the paper. All right, fast forward to that Sunday, the phone rings, it's Marty. Here's the story, Paul. The Washington Post is going to be sold to Jeff Bezos. My wife was right. Not to Amazon, but to Jeff Bezos as an individual. I work with Marty in secret only by email because we knew that putting anything into the content system of the Washington Post would inevitably leak to all the nosy people that snoop through the content system inside the Washington Post. So we did it in secret overnight. I talked to Bezos, I talked to Don Graham, I talked to Catherine Weymouth for the story, put it together, wrote like 85 inches, twice, 3 times the normal news story. So I filed this story Monday at around noon. The announcement is going to go out at 4:30. So between noon and 4:30, there's 4.5 hours for this story to leak. It's a gossipy, big deal story in the media world. At 4:15, an email goes out to the entire staff. We'll be meeting in the community room at the Post's old building on 15th Street, this is, for a major announcement. Everybody be there. And immediately the buzz goes up. What the hell is this about? 4:30 comes around. They hit the publish button. The story goes out. It doesn't leak. Downstairs in the community room, the gathering of literally hundreds of people in the Washington Post, the newsroom and the business side. And it's standing room only. People are flooded out the door to hear what the story is. Don Graham announces this to almost audible shock. That's a story that'll stick with me for the rest of my life.
So for those of us on the outside, the next 10 years had sort of two storylines. One was, wow, there's all these new money and resources and strength coming into the Post, and they're getting this and they're getting that. And then Trump became president, they're fighting Trump and things are going great. And then all of a sudden, there was this sort of change. And suddenly it was like, oh no, they're in trouble and they're doing buyouts that people like Paul Farhi are taking. Can you give us the dummy version of that 10-year history?
Well, you've got the basic outline right. So Jeff Bezos, we want to give the Post runway to figure out how to adapt to the internet era and the massive changes that have occurred in the news business. By runway, he meant money and time. And he did that. He added enormously to the news staff, added the kind of bells and whistles that you need to market journalism in the 21st century. He had an engineering staff, which developed a new content management system, which became a separate business that was very successful for the Washington Post. You also had the curiosity about this new Trump administration. The Post had lots of scoops about what was going on with Trump. It led to a great increase both in the newsroom resources and, more importantly, a great increase in the amount of subscribers that the Post was getting. You watch the curve of revenue going up, you see the number of subscribers going up, and amazingly, by 2020, when the pandemic hits, the Washington Post, this money-losing, declining entity, is now growing and making money profitable. We don't know, because Jeff Bezos is got all the numbers close to the vest. We don't know how profitable it is, but it's an enormous turnaround, all told, both in the readership and the revenue, advertising and subscription for the Washington Post. And I remember at the start of 2021, after being stuck in the house like everybody else throughout the pandemic, that Fred Ryan, the then publisher, sends us all an email saying, because we did so well in 2020, everybody's going to get a bonus. I never got a bonus until this point, and the bonus is going to be $2,021 for everybody. That's fantastic. Okay, stop there, though. That might have been the peak of the Jeff Bezos era at the Washington Post. After 2020, after maybe 2021, things start to decline. Trump is out of office. There's news fatigue. There's subscription fatigue. Advertising is going into other things other than news. The Post's business fortunes are beginning to deteriorate. And this leads to what we see today. Any newspaper's greatest expense is the cost of labor. And so we have a buyout. Fred Ryan makes a decision in 2022, I believe, to get rid of the Sunday magazine. That was the first sign. The Washington Post is no longer growing. The Washington Post is declining. And then in 2023, mid-2023, they announced this buyout of 10% of the staff, business and news. I was one of those who took it.
Why'd you take it?
Well, A, I'm old. B, I could have continued to work, but at the end of the 2 years of salary that I would have earned, I would have been even older. And then what? Just a few months ago, they announced another buyout, and there's going to be a decimation of the staff again, with some of the most senior, experienced, and talented people leaving the paper once again. So in some sense, it's a personal decision. In some sense, it's a business decision, because the Washington Post is effectively going downhill. And do you want to continue to work for the Washington Post? I still think it has a lot of value. I will never give up my subscription to the Post. I think it's producing really very good journalism under the circumstances, but it's an organization in great distress. A couple little points here is, what readers did when Jeff Bezos decided, oddly, to not endorse a presidential candidate 11 days before the election of 2024. About 200,000 or 300,000 of them, fully 10% of the subscriber base of the Washington Post, said, we're out of here, cancel my subscription. Devastating. I think that may have been the single most damaging business decision a newspaper proprietor had ever made when you look at the loss of revenue and the loss of subscribers and the loss of, credibility.
You wrote that it was the biggest self-own in newspaper history.
Think about it. I mean, can you come up with an example in which 10% of your subscribers say, I don't want anything to do with you based on one decision alone? The thing about it, it was A, unnecessary, and B, it had been put in motion many months before. He had intended to do this. He just hadn't announced it until he got around to announcing it. Terrible timing. It looked like, it wasn't, but it looked like a sellout to Trump. It looks like you're pulling your punch in the face of Trump's election.
Well, so this is the other thing that's changed. Now, I've written about this a little bit, too, that when Bezos purchased the Post, he said these very thoughtful sounding, erudite things about he's going to be hands off. He would feel disgusting. He would feel sleazy if he tried to meddle around with it. He was going to let the professionals handle it, et cetera, et cetera. He came across when meeting like establishment Washington as what a thoughtful steward of a civic institution and was quite admired. He led on. He was a big fanboy of the post-Watergate coverage. He spent like tens of thousands of dollars to buy the lock that had been broken as part of the Watergate robbery. And that was then. And now the sort of image in the sort of popular Washington mind, in a lot of people's minds, is here's this craven guy who's manipulating the newspaper in order to curry favor with the president and jetting off with his glamorous wife. But how did you experience that change in sort of public image?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. Those are extreme black and white caricatures of the situation. They're not entirely wrong, I must say, but it's a bit more ambiguous than that. I said this many times, and I'll stick with it, that at least up till very recently, Jeff Bezos was the best publisher any publication or news organization could have because he did two things. He gave the Post a lot of money, and two, he didn't tell the Post what to do with that money, that there were professionals, news people, business people who knew exactly what was necessary. And Bezos obviously had input and general guidance, but the execution was by people like Fred Ryan, the publisher, and Marty Baron, the editor, and then the people in the ranks down the line. When things turn bad, he becomes Snidely Whiplash. He made some gigantic blunders and, if you want to call them, PR errors in the course of dealing with the decline of the Post. And one, of course, was this decision about endorsement or not endorsing. The other was his appointment of a fellow named Will Lewis to replace Fred Ryan. Will Lewis came in literally the day after I left. And it has not been a good relationship at the paper ever since. He, a few months later, fires the semi-popular editor of the paper, Sally Busby, who tries to demote her first, but then she basically quits and is forced out. This causes an uproar. And Lewis's background becomes an issue. He has a rather checkered past with Rupert Murdoch and cleaning up Murdoch's phone hacking scandals in England. And he also says he's going to develop new revenue sources, new streams through subscription products that the Post will market to the public. It's been a year and a half. He hasn't really done that. And that project hasn't seemed to have taken off. So you have this character running the ship who has alienated the staff and really doesn't seem to have a lot of great ideas or programs to turn the direction around. I don't know why Jeff Bezos has stuck with him. He has no record of success at the Post. Maybe he's prevented worse from happening, which is, I guess, an achievement in itself. But it really hasn't been a great, successful Will Lewis administration. And so that's occurring at the same time. And these buyouts are devastating for morale, as is the loss of confidence in the leadership.
Well, right. Because when even a little part of you suspects that, like, oh, maybe they made that decision in order to curry favor with the administration, it's very hard to get that back.
And that's the chapter since, I would say, November, when Bezos pops up with this "we're not going to endorse" thing. Since then, he shows up at the inauguration as one of the tech bros, billionaires, supporting Trump on stage as he's sworn in. Amazon, which Bezos still is executive chairman of, subsequently strikes a $40 million deal with Melania Trump to do a documentary. You know, everybody looks at that as a bribe to Melania Trump and to Trump himself.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine Katharine Graham signing off on a Pat Nixon biography.
Yeah, and this looks like a conflict of interest. Can you be the owner and publisher of the Washington Post while also doing deals with the administration? Amazon itself gave $1 million to Trump's inaugural committee. Bezos doesn't really adequately address these things. He says, my ownership of the Washington Post is, quote, a complexifier with all my other businesses, which, by the way, depend on contracts with the federal government. He knows he's conflicted, and he basically shrugs and says, what are you going to do?
If I'm an Amazon shareholder, I might look at this and say, what are you doing messing around with the newspaper, man? You've cost us business. Trump retaliated against Amazon because he was mad at Bezos about Post stuff during his first term. The crosswinds are pretty vicious here.
Yeah, that's the best case scenario, really, in some ways, is I'm going to brave all this stuff that might affect my business interests because I believe in the institution of the Washington Post. You know what? I don't know how much he believes in the institution of the Washington Post. Something I would also say at the same time, and maybe it's contradictory, is Jeff Bezos is still the best hope for the Washington Post. And the reason for that is if he would get his backbone, he would still be the best of all the other possible candidates for ownership of the Washington Post. And by the way, the Post isn't for sale. He's made no indication that he wants to sell it. So the Post is, for better or worse, stuck with him.
So I got to ask before I let you go, because this is CityCast DC, for all the talk of we're not going to do presidential endorsements anymore, I always thought presidential endorsements, I don't think a lot of people's minds really get changed, but a place where the big dominant local paper, the Post here, has actually had an ability to change minds and make a difference is in opining about who should be mayor, who should be in the city council. Is there a sense of where that is going to go?
I assume they will still do that. There are still editorials in the Post. And the fact that they decided not to endorse the president doesn't preclude them from endorsing everybody else. The other endorsements I think are still on the table. Do those fit in with free markets and personal liberties? I don't know.
I'm interested in what these epic changes of the Post mean for Washington, for my neighbors, for people who live here. And besides this, like the raw numbers and thrust of the metro section, there are so many other ways that the Post was an incredibly influential force in Washington, D.C. It helped make Marion Barry mayor the first time. And there's also a question around the culture coverage. Do we still see thorough coverage of the local theater scene or museum openings and so on? Do you have a sense of where that's going? Because if covering the school board in Fairfax County is not profitable, covering small theaters in Washington is also that's not going to get you the scale that you would get by writing for the whole English-speaking world.
Yeah, I do think it's at best, a second-class citizen in terms of the overall approach of the Washington Post, as we discussed. It won't disappear. There's still a very large Metro staff. And let's say something good here. The Metro staff of the Washington Post, even after this buyout, is probably going to be 70 people, 75 people. That's bigger than the admittedly diminished entire newsroom staff of most regional newspapers. So it's still formidable. It's less formidable than it used to be, but it's still formidable in absolute terms. Show me a newsroom in America that large covering a metropolitan area. There may be some, but I'm not sure there are many. That's still good. The thrust of your question is correct. These are not going to be high priority. And it's, I think, going to depend on individual decisions whether or not you will see editorials endorsing the mayor or endorsing local issues. Because again, the thrust of the Post is outward. It's not local.
Paul, thank you so much for being here.
I love doing it. Thank you for having me.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and maybe subscribe to our morning newsletter. And hey, this episode might remind you, this is a tough business. CityCast also needs all the help it can get, and it needs the people who like us and who are moved by what we do to stand up. So don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast neighbor. Just visit membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.